James Paterson, the implications for Australia was built into that question. What do you say?
Well, Tony, it's sadly a further escalation of the tensions in the region following the disruption of the supply of oil through the Straits of Hormuz, which Australia is obviously participating in an international coalition in an attempt to push back on that activity. About 6% of the world's oil comes from Saudi Arabia and that supply will be affected, but the International Energy Agency has said that global stocks of oil will not be threatened by this. Unfortunately, it probably will mean higher prices for consumers at the petrol bowser, but in terms of our security of supply of petrol and oil, it's not at serious risk.
How do you know that, actually? Because Donald Trump is talking about already dipping into the strategic petroleum supply, the emergency supply the United States has. We don't have one in Australia. We've got 28 days, effectively, of petrol supplies before it gets very, very dodgy. And one possibility is to ask the Americans to give us some of their strategic supply.
We have 28 days' worth of supply within our borders, but the Energy Minister has said on a modern definition of oil supply, which takes into account the oil that is already on its way to Australia, being shipped here, that we have much closer to the 90 days, which is recommended. So we're relatively confident about that, although we shouldn't be complacent about it. And certainly if there were a further escalation of tensions, if the worst came to worst that we were talking about earlier on the panel, that would potentially disrupt it in a more profound and disturbing way, and we might have to look at options like going to the United States and trying to access their strategic oil reserve. And
just briefly on the prospect of further conflict, already a commitment to ships in the Gulf, or at least one. Could this escalate as well? Could Australia be asked, as they were in previous Gulf conflicts, to contribute a lot more?
Well, we certainly don't want it to escalate, Tony, and it's not in our interest that it escalates. The contribution...
It's a bit out of your hands, though, isn't it?
It may well be. Our contribution to that coalition in the Straits of Hormuz is a very precise, targeted, time-limited contribution and a relatively measured and moderate one. Of course, governments always consider, if events change, how we need to respond to that, but we're certainly not seeking any escalation.
James, you first.
I think it's very important that we draw a very sharp distinction between what Gladys Liu has done or is alleged to have done and what Sam did. I think they're two very, very different things.
What's the difference when it comes to fundraising? Because that's the core thing that's unresolved here. As far as we know, there hasn't been an audit of the funds that Gladys Liu brought into the party. Should there be?
The very clear difference is that Gladys Liu was a fundraiser on behalf of the Liberal Party, and in doing so, all the money that she raised for the Liberal Party was declared in accordance with state and federal fundraising laws.
No, it wasn't.
What Sam did...
But that wasn't. That's just not true, James.
It is true. What Sam did
was... $40,000 that wasn't declared.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned $40,000, Sam, because what Sam did was accept money personally from Wang Zhangmo or companies that he controlled. These were not donations. $40,000 to meet legal fees that Sam had incurred, $1,600 to meet a travel bill overspend, and as a result of the relationship he developed with Wang Zhangmo, he was a lobbyist for Wang Zhangmo's citizenship, calling the Immigration Department twice to personally check on the progress of that application. He hired out the media centre at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Offices, stood in front of a crest of the Australian government alongside Wang Zhangmo and called for an end to the bipartisan Australian government position on the South China Sea and called for the government to adopt the Chinese government's position. And it is alleged when he went to visit Wang Zhangmo at his private residence, he advised him that he believed he was under the surveillance of national security agencies, that they should leave their phones inside, that they should go outside and have a conversation.
OK, all right. I'll pause you there. OK, I want to hear from James first. The idea of having publicly funded elections, getting rid of the whole donations thing, you wouldn't have a problem with Gladys Liu if that happened. Is it a good idea to at least consider this kind of fundamental change, get rid of this pernicious fundraising?
I want to address that, Tony, but I also want to come back to something that the questioner opened up with, which I think is a really important point to make. Yes, lots of politicians make mistakes. Yes, lots of political careers end in tears. But let's not lump in what Sam did with conventional political errors and misjudgment. It was a very, very different thing. No, this is a serious point.
This is a serious point.
Angus Taylor? This is a serious point. Sam became associated with someone whose citizenship was rejected on character grounds and whose permanent residency was cancelled on the advice of security agencies, and who we have very good reason to believe was an agent of influence of the Chinese Communist Party in Australia. That is not just a routine political mistake or a routine bad judgment. That is profoundly
James, you made that point earlier pretty much, so did John. So let's move on to this question of donations, political donations and the fundraising element of it. Is that a pernicious and poisonous element of our politics?
Not inherently, Tony. Just because some politicians are incapable of acting ethically around donations doesn't mean the whole political system is broken. And there are some really downside risks.
So you have no problems at all with Gladys Liu and what she did, because the Prime Minister, for example, at the time, Malcolm Turnbull, on the advice of his own security agencies, did not go along to one of her fundraisers because of the people who were donating the money. So you have no problem with that?
I think Gladys herself would acknowledge that prior to being elected to Parliament, she should have been more judicious in some of her associations, particularly with Chinese community organisations.
Didn't this ring any bells? If you've got a Prime Minister who is being told by his security agency, don't go there, don't get photographed with those people, and yet they are key people making donations.
Well, I'm not privy to that advice, obviously, Tony, but I don't actually believe the incident you're talking about was even a fundraiser. I'm pretty sure it was just a community meet and greet on behalf of the member for Chisholm at the time, Julia Banks. I don't think it was fundraising related. So I'm not sure you've diagnosed
the Prime Minister was advised not to go.
That's what media reports say. I'm not privy to
be seen with the people who were at the core of this.
I don't know if that's true, Tony. That's what the media are reporting. I don't have any way of independently verifying.
Eva Cox. James, what was the Prime Minister accusing Labor of, if not racism?
Tony, the Prime Minister didn't use the word racist. What he said that the Labor Party was doing was engaging in grubby tactics when it comes to Gladys Liu, and I think he's right to do so. And I'll give you a concrete example of how they did this.
He made a broader point, though, didn't he? He made a broader point. He extended it out to the entire
He did, and
Chinese
I'll come to that, but I just want to substantiate this point about grubby tactics. In question time last week in the House of Representatives, the Labor Party asked question after question after question, which was ruled out of order by the Speaker. Now, the questioner in this case was Mark Dreyfus. He knows how to ask a question that is in order if he wants to. He also knows how to ask a question that's out of order. And in asking questions that cast aspersions about Gladys Liu that were out of order, he knew that the Speaker, Tony Smith, would rightly prevent the Prime Minister from answering those questions. So the smear was raised, but there was no possibility to respond to that smear, and that's why the PM has said that there are grubby tactics being engaged in here. To the wider point, Australia was dangerously complacent, particularly big sections of our media and political class a few years ago, about the risks of foreign interference. And I actually think, by and large, it's a good thing that we are now living in a much more hypersensitive environment to those things. We should be alert to those risks for all the reasons that John outlines. However, in doing so, we have to be really, really careful that we don't inadvertently or otherwise cast aspersions about good Australians who love this country, who love freedom and democracy as much as any other person in this country, who happen to be Chinese. And there's 1.2 million of them, and they deserve respect like any other Australian.
Sam, I'll give you OK, James, it's obviously aimed at both sides of politics, and clearly there's a sense you're getting from our young question, and we'll go to... By the way, let me just put it to you. I mean, do you see both sides of politics as lacking in this area?
Oh, 100% I do. I'm not going to hide it. Love Labor, always have, and I'm more leaning towards Greens. I do think what you're saying, Sam, about the election, like, I don't think it's Labor's policy that lost the election. I think Liberal actually had a short and sharp campaign, and it got through to so many people. But I'm telling you, I was devastated on election day, and all of my friends as well, who are all, you know, want something good to come of the climate one day.
So what do you? So these guys won government. What do you want to hear from them?
From Liberal?
Yep.
Anything. Nothing, to be honest.
Okay. All right. Now, James, I'm not going to ask you nothing. So, but let's start with this thing of the bushfires, because it was at the core of the question, and people are terrified. This summer is going to be one of the worst we've ever seen, and the bushfires are being driven, in the belief of many, by climate change. What do you say?
Well, I fear I'm not going to please you, I'm afraid, with that lead-up. But I understand why the environmental movement attaches a lot of importance to motions like this in the Parliament. But the truth is that they are symbolic motions. And had that motion passed the House of Representatives this week, what would have been different about the climate? Nothing at all. What would have been different about the bushfires in Queensland and New South Wales? Nothing at all. I think you asked it in your question, what should you do to get through to policymakers to have change? I think you should focus on the substantive issues, on the policy questions, on the big challenges that we face, because...
Can I just say this? If half the country is on fire during summer, that's going to be a substantive issue.
Yeah.
Do you accept that...
Just a fraction of hyperbole there, Tony, but...
Well,
This question is not in the talking points.
Country, but a lot of the country is on fire, and places that haven't been on fire for a long time. Do you accept that climate change has a role in that?
Of course, Tony, and you've asked me that question on this panel many times before, and I accept the science of climate change, just to do the tick disclaimer for you. But if Australia shut down all of our industry tomorrow, it wouldn't make any difference at all to the global temperatures. The reality is that this is a global challenge, and if the course that we are on, particularly from large emitters, countries like China, which is the world's largest emitter almost by a factor of 2 to the next largest emitter, and under the Paris Agreement promised to increase their emissions by 2030, well then anything Australia does is not going to make a big difference. The reason why I'm optimistic and why I hope you're not too discouraged by tonight is that no matter what happens on an intergovernmental level, or no matter what happens with Paris or Kyoto or any of these agreements, there's actually technological changes that are happening right now that are really positive. Like the advances in efficiency in photovoltaic solar cells have been way more than anybody forecast that they would be. And ultimately, I put my trust and faith in human ingenuity and technological evolution to solve these things more than any government policy can.
John, quickly on that.
Oh, I mean...
OK, James. OK, first of all, can you just talk to Catherine and try and justify your policy or potential policy to someone in her situation and her father's situation?
Absolutely, and in doing so, I want to just respond to the final comment that Eva made there. Why on earth would the government want to discourage people from seeking work? That would be totally counterproductive. In what universe would be that be our objective? I have no interest at all in demonising or stigmatising people who are on welfare. None at all. They are our fellow Australians. They deserve to be treated with dignity and respect like everyone else. But what we do know is if you are on welfare and you are also abusing drugs, you're going to find it really difficult to get a job. Now, I completely accept Eva's point about the fact that creating jobs for these people is a burden that falls on the government. It's one of our #1 priorities. We focus on it all the time. I think the 1.4 million jobs we've created since we won office in 2013 is a good start, but we have to keep doing it every day because if there aren't jobs for people to go to, then they're not going to get them, obviously.
So do you think it's fair enough for her father to be drug tested?
I don't accept that it's inherently degrading to be drug tested. People in the mining industry are drug tested all the time.
They have a job.
Exactly, they do have a job.
They have a job which involves them having to not be on drugs.
Indeed. In fact, I think all jobs you should not be on drugs in order to be employed, Eva. Not just in the mining industry. I think it's an impediment to working in any job.
What about a universal drug testing program for everybody who works?
I mean, I think that would probably be quite expensive and excessive because I think that's not the target area.
Would it be a good idea, though, just based on the logic that you put forward?
No, I think we should target people where we know where there's a problem. We know that drugs are preventing them from getting a job.
Unemployed.
I just want to say one thing to you. I assure you, there are a lot more politicians doing drugs than there are people who are on new stuff.
Madeleine.
Thanks, Sam.
I will take your drug test right now. You've got one, I will take it right now.
I just want to know